That's all you're getting.
This food is spoiled.
Stop questioning my staff.
Why was my service restricted?
His access was always valid. Who gave you that authority?
I founded this company.
The food that arrived at his table was already cold. Not the cold of something prepared early and forgotten. The cold of something that had never been meant for him to eat carefully, only to eat quickly and without complaint. Marcus Webb pushed the tray to the edge of the table and looked out at a room he had designed himself 22 years ago. Now, watching him from the other side of a partition he had never ordered built. He had arrived at Pinnacle Crown Lounge at Chicago O'Hare just before 8 that Monday morning. Moving through Terminal B the way he always moved through airports when he was not there to be recognized. Gray t-shirt under a canvas jacket, dark jeans, leather shoes worn soft at the toe, a canvas backpack faded at the seams, teared near the zipper, slung over one shoulder the way he had carried it at 23 when he worked overnight shifts and studied hotel operations during meal breaks. No assistant walked ahead of him to clear a path. No executive called to arrange a private entrance. No watch on his wrist announced a price. He was, to anyone who looked without looking carefully, a man who might belong anywhere or nowhere in particular. He joined the priority lane. He waited his turn. When a young woman behind the podium scanned his boarding pass, the screen turned green immediately. First-class access confirmed. Her name badge read Cassandra. She looked up with a practiced welcome, the kind shaped by hundreds of identical mornings, and said, "Good morning, welcome to Pinnacle Crown." She had barely finished when another voice cut across the desk. One moment, Diana Harlow stepped from behind the marble counter with the unhurried confidence of someone who had decided the outcome before she arrived. She was in her mid-40s, a navy blazer pressed sharp at the shoulders, the lounge crest pinned precisely above her heart. Her eyes moved first to Marcus's shoes, then to the frayed seams of his backpack, then upward to his face. The sequence took less than 2 seconds. "I'll need to see a photo ID," she said. Marcus handed over his license without comment. Diana studied the photograph with the careful attention she had not given the green screen. She asked for the card used to purchase the ticket, then for the original confirmation email. Then, while Marcus waited, she asked whether he had a physical membership card. Behind him, the priority lane had grown. A white man in a golf jacket and jeans lifted his phone at the adjacent podium. The agent there glanced at the screen and waved him through without asking for anything else. A white woman behind him gave only her last name. Her husband made a small joke about needing coffee. Both were welcomed inside before Diana had finished examining Marcus's license. "His access was confirmed in the system," Cassandra said quietly. Her eyes moved to Diana's face rather than the screen. His boarding pass and profile match. Diana did not turn. "I'll decide when verification is complete." Marcus looked at the green confirmation still visible on Cassandra's screen. "Do these steps apply to every guest?" Diana returned his license with a measured expression. "Our staff uses professional judgment to protect member privacy and the premium experience." "Professional judgment," Marcus repeated, placing the phrase somewhere he would not forget it. What Vanessa did not know, what Diana could not know, was that professional judgment was exactly what he had come to Chicago to examine. 3 days earlier, sitting alone in his Washington office with 2 documents side by side beneath the white desk lamp, Marcus had read an internal performance report that described this lounge as one of the best managed in the region. 96% guest satisfaction, no significant food safety incidents, the lowest complaint volume in the entire Central Division. At the bottom of the page, Diana Harlow had been nominated for Pinnacle Crown's annual Leadership Award. He had set that document aside and opened the second one. It was a copy of a complaint the Charlotte team had already closed. A black first-class passenger wrote that employees had asked him 3 separate times whether the ticket actually belonged to him. He had shown his identification, his boarding pass, and the credit card used to purchase the seat. None of that appeared in the official summary. The internal note read only, "Guest appeared unusually sensitive to routine verification." Marcus had read the sentence twice. The language was careful. That made it worse. It had not described what happened. It had replaced what happened with a flaw in the guest's own character. He had opened a second complaint. A black physician said she had been directed to a rear seating area near a service corridor, even though open tables remained by the windows. When she asked why, an employee marked her as confrontational. The physician had attached a short phone video. Marcus had pressed play. The woman's voice was quiet throughout. She had not raised it once. She had asked a simple question about whether her ticket included access to the main room, and she had waited while the manager talked around the answer for nearly 3 minutes. Nothing in the video matched the word confrontational. The word had been chosen before anyone reviewed the footage. That evening, an anonymous message had appeared in his inbox. No greeting, no request, only a warning and a single image. Do not announce the inspection. They will replace the food, delete the records, and move the inventory. Sit near service door 3 after breakfast. The image showed a sealed case of premium smoked salmon being pushed through a service corridor at a timestamp that matched a morning when the inventory system recorded every case as having been opened and served inside the lounge. Marcus had stared at the photograph for a long time. A transfer could have been authorized. A timestamp could have been misread. He had built Pinnacle Crown by refusing to confuse suspicion with fact. He needed to see what no report could show him. He crossed to a cabinet near his office window, moved the formal travel cases aside, and took down the old backpack from the lower shelf. Now standing in the priority lane while Diana Harlow asked for identification that no system had requested, and Marcus felt the familiar shape of the moment. Not shock, not anger. Something quieter and more tired, the recognition of a room he had stood in before, where proof became insufficient the instant it belonged to a black man, dressed without ceremony. He could have ended the exchange in one sentence. A single call would have changed Diana's posture and filled the doorway with apologies. But that would only teach her how to recognize one powerful man. It would tell him nothing about how she treated everyone else. He handed over the confirmation email. Diana studied it. Then she turned to her tablet across the screen. An orange label appeared beside his name. Marcus saw it clearly. Manual service monitoring. Active. Cassandra saw it too. Her eyes flickered downward, then steadied. The way a person steadies when they have seen something they cannot unsay and have already decided what to do about the knowing. "All right," Diana said finally, as though releasing him rather than honoring a valid ticket. She turned to an attendant standing nearby. "Take him to the annex." The attendant hesitated. "The main room still has open seating." Diana's gaze did not soften. The annex. Marcus adjusted the backpack strap and stepped through the doorway. Above him, brushed metal letters spelled out Pinnacle Crown. The name he had chosen more than 2 decades ago because he wanted travelers to feel received rather than measured. That morning, standing beneath them for the first time as a stranger, the letters looked less like a welcome and more like a question, waiting for an answer he had not yet been permitted to give. The attendant led Marcus past the main room without slowing. Through the open archway, Marcus saw everything the lounge had been designed to offer. Polished tables near floor to ceiling windows that faced the runway. A buffet lit from below with warm light. Silver trays of smoked salmon arranged beside fresh pastries, and a fruit station where the bowls were actually cold. Employees moved between tables with the quiet attentiveness that cost a great deal to train correctly. The hum of the room was relaxed, unhurried. the sound of people who believed they had earned the right to sit still for a while before the next flight. The attendant did not take Marcus there. They turned left at a low partition and descended into a different room wearing the same name. The carpet in the annex had been replaced at least once less often than the carpet in the main room. The difference was visible near the base of the partition, where the fibers thinned and the color had faded unevenly. 2 electrical outlets along the rear wall carried small paper signs taped over them, out of service. The chairs faced the wrong direction, turned inward away from the runway, and the windows back here were narrower, framed by ductwork that ran along the ceiling. Service carts passed between the tables because the corridor to the kitchen ran directly through the space, close enough that the wheel of one cart caught the edge of a chair leg as it passed. This was not a quieter version of the main lounge. It was the part of the building that had been given the lounge's name without being given its purpose. Marcus lowered the backpack beside the chair the attendant indicated and looked at the room. 3 seats away, a black man in a reflective work uniform sat with a first-class boarding pass resting face up on the table. He had not removed the uniform, and he had not been offered an attendant. He was eating something from a paper bag he appeared to have carried in himself. Across from him, a black woman in a navy hospital jacket sat with her carry-on tucked beneath her chair. Several empty tables remained near the windows in the main room, visible through the gap in the partition, but she had been seated here beside the service corridor. Her coffee cup was empty. No one had come to refill it. Near the partition, a Latino businessman in a pressed shirt balanced a leather document case on his knees because the nearest storage shelf had a cracked bracket. He had not complained about it. He had adjusted the way people adjust, when they are not sure whether asking will help or only mark them as difficult. Further along the row, an older black man sat with a veteran's travel folder tucked under his arm, connecting flight information visible in the plastic sleeve. He had the stillness of someone who had decided a long time ago that waiting was not the same as losing. Marcus noted each face without staring. He set his phone face down on the table. Several minutes passed, then 3 white passengers entered through the main archway. They were wearing sweatshirts and athletic pants. One had a gym bag with a Velcro fastening that had not been fully closed. They were, by any visible measure, dressed no more formally than the man in the reflective uniform or the woman in the hospital jacket. An attendant appeared before any of them reached the podium. She smiled with the full range of her face, not the compressed version that people use when service is an obligation rather than a choice, and invited them to select any open table near the buffet. One of them dropped the gym bag onto a second chair. An employee brought coffee to the table without being asked. Marcus watched the attendant settle the gym bag onto the chair, back to make more room. She said something that made the man in the sweatshirt laugh. Then she returned to the buffet to straighten a serving utensil that was already straight. He had written the service training manual for this lounge during Pinnacle Crown's 3rd year of operation. He had taught employees that consistency was not a policy choice. It was a promise made to every guest who paid for access without knowing in advance how the morning would go. A guest who entered this lounge was supposed to feel, regardless of where they were from or what they were wearing, that the price of their ticket had purchased the same experience as the price of anyone else's ticket. The man in the reflective uniform reached for his coffee and found it had gone cold. He turned toward the main room for a moment, tracking a cart of fresh carafes being delivered to the window tables, then looked back down at his boarding pass. Marcus picked up his phone and entered a note. Time, table position. Number of guests in the annex. Number of guests at window tables. Approximate ratio of observed service contacts per table. A figure approached his table. Cassandra Reed moved with deliberate calm to Carrying a glass of water on a small, she set it in front of Marcus with both hands and kept her voice low enough that it would not carry to the main podium. "I'm sorry about what happened at the entrance." Marcus looked toward Diana, who was visible through the partition gap, standing near the main desk with her tablet angled toward her. Then he looked back at Cassandra. "What does the orange label mean?" Cassandra's hand paused beside the tray. "You saw that?" "I was standing directly in front of the screen." She glanced over her shoulder, a small, involuntary movement. Then she pressed her lips together as though deciding something she had already decided before she walked over. "Management uses it," she said. "For guests, they want staff to monitor closely." Monitor how? She did not retreat behind a policy reference or a statement about her position, she answered. "We are told not to offer the full menu proactively unless guests ask. We note how long they stay. If they question a procedure, we log it. If they approach other guests, we notify a manager before responding." Marcus let the information settle. What qualifies someone for the label? "There is no written standard," she said, then carefully. "What they tell us is that some guests need extra observation, that the presentation does not match the booking level. Sometimes they use the phrase not fitting the usual profile." Her discomfort was visible but controlled, the discomfort of someone who had rehearsed what they would say the next time they found the chance to say it. "Have you reported any of this?" Cassandra inhaled. Before she could answer, Diana appeared at the table. The temperature in the room did not change, but something in the space between the three of them did. "Is there a problem here?" Diana asked. Cassandra said that Marcus had asked about the service code. Diana's expression did not shift, but her gaze settled on Cassandra with a weight that had nothing to do with the present conversation and everything to do with every conversation that had come before it. "Guests," Diana said pleasantly, "do not need explanations of internal procedures." She turned to Marcus. "Those systems exist to protect everyone's comfort." "Whose comfort?" Marcus asked. Diana held his eyes for half a second. Then she lowered her tablet, and in that small movement the screen angled toward Marcus long enough for him to read 3 words beneath his name: presentation mismatch, and confirm behavior before extended service. She locked the screen too late. Marcus did not accuse her. He did not reach for his phone. He sat back in the chair and looked at the screen door marked with the number 3, positioned directly across the aisle from where he was seated, exactly where the anonymous message had told him to sit. He understood now why Diana had placed him here without knowing it. He had been given the best seat in the room. Diana sent Cassandra back to the main podium with a look that carried its own instruction set. A different attendant arrived at Marcus's table shortly after, placing a thin paper menu beside his water glass without making eye contact. In the main room, through the gap in the partition, Marcus could see another employee walking the window tables and describing the full buffet and the made-to-order breakfast options to the 3 guests in sweatshirts. One of them asked for eggs. The attendant said, of course, and took the order on a small pad. Marcus looked at the paper menu. Coffee. Packaged fruit. 1 sandwich option. "Do all first-class guests have the same food access?" he asked. The attendant glanced toward Diana before answering. "It depends on the service level shown in the system." Marcus held up his phone with the boarding pass visible. First class, full access. There was no asterisk on the ticket, no secondary tier, no fine print. The only classification attached to his access was the one Diana Harlow had added manually, after looking at his backpack and deciding something she had not written down. The attendant stepped back without confirming anything. Marcus watched the main room and waited. 12 minutes passed before his food arrived. The tray was set down without ceremony. A chicken sandwich in a loose paper wrapper, warm only at the center. The lettuce beneath the bread had softened at the edges and turned brown along the fold. The fruit cup held juice that had gone cloudy, the pieces floating rather than sitting. The coffee carried a thin skin across the top. The yogurt cup had no date label, only a faint rectangular shadow on the plastic where one had been pulled away. 30 feet from where he sat, an attendant in the main room lifted a pair of tongs and transferred smoked salmon from a replenished tray to a guest's plate. Fresh pastries filled a basket lined with cloth. Berries sat in a white bowl under a strip of low light. The contrast was not accidental. It was not the result of a rushed morning or a distracted employee. It was the consistent output of a system that had decided which guests received care and which guests received something that looked like care from far enough away. Marcus turned the yogurt container over carefully. The dried adhesive on the underside was pale yellow, slightly tacky. Someone had peeled the label deliberately. He set the container down and photographed the tray. He entered the time, the table number, and the condition of each item into his phone in specific language, the way he had been trained to document when he was an assistant manager at 23. And the general manager told him that memory was what lawyers argued about, but photographs and timestamps were what they settled cases on. One cold tray could be an oversight. A removed date label suggested a decision. Across the aisle, service door 3 opened. Trevor Norris stepped through it with the unhurried confidence of a man doing something routine. He was in his late 30s, wide-shouldered, wearing the grey uniform of Pinnacle Crown's logistics team. He pushed a service cart with 3 sealed cases stacked on the lower shelf. Marcus could read the labels from where he sat. Premium smoked salmon, imported cheese. Bakery products from a supplier whose name appeared in Pinnacle Crown's approved vendor list, and on the invoices Marcus reviewed each quarter. Trevor positioned the cart beneath the wall-mounted barcode scanner beside the door and passed each case beneath it in turn. The display read, "Transferred to service floor." The cart should have turned toward the buffet. Trevor pushed it in the opposite direction, back through service door 3. Through the gap in the doorway, Marcus saw the exterior loading corridor and a man standing beside a second cart. The man wore a jacket with the logo of a local events company printed across the chest pocket. He checked the labels on each case as Trevor handed them across. No envelope changed hands. No paperwork was signed. The exchange took less than 90 seconds and had the practiced quality of a sequence repeated many times. Trevor's phone vibrated as he returned through the door. He looked at the screen, deleted the notification without reading beyond the first line, and walked toward the kitchen. 4 minutes later, a different employee came through a side entrance carrying a cardboard case with the name of a distributor Marcus did not recognize. Not a supplier he had approved, not a brand that appeared in any Pinnacle Crown contract he had signed. The employee carried the case into the secondary stockroom. Marcus noted the distributor's name, the approximate size of the case, and the time. He sat still and let the pattern complete itself. Pinnacle Crown paid for premium inventory. A portion of that inventory left through door 3 and entered a private market where Trevor or his associates sold it for cash or kind. Cheaper replacements came in through the secondary entrance, plausible in quantity, but not in quality, and were distributed from the secondary stockroom to the trays served in the annex. The main buffet retained enough premium product to pass any spot inspection. The guests directed to the annex, guests who had been labeled as requiring extra observation, guests whose complaints had been pre-categorized as emotional reactions and presentation preferences, absorbed the difference. The scheme required the bias to function. The bias created the population Trevor needed. The two systems had grown together so completely that neither looked unusual from the inside anymore. Near the partition, the black nurse in the hospital jacket lifted her fruit cup and turned it slightly, frowning. She caught the eye of the nearest attendant and said, quietly and without dramatics, "This smells fermented." The attendant did not smell the cup. She did not call the kitchen. She did not take the cup away. She opened her tablet and typed something. Marcus could see the screen from where he sat. Guest dissatisfied with presentation. No safety issue observed. No thermometer appeared. No label was checked. No one asked when the fruit had been prepared or where it had been stored. A possible food safety concern had been processed into the language of personal preference before anyone investigated whether it was real. Marcus looked from the screen to the closed door, marked 3. He thought about the anonymous email. The sender had not needed to explain what was happening in this lounge. They had only needed to tell him where to sit. He reached for his water and drank slowly, watching everything. Cassandra returned 15 minutes later, carrying a water pitcher and moving with the careful deliberateness of someone who had thought through each step before taking it. She refilled Marcus's glass and, without pausing in the motion, slid a folded square of paper beneath the base of the glass. Her hand trembled once. Then it steadied. She moved on to the next table without looking back. Marcus waited until she had crossed the room. Then he lifted the glass and unfolded the paper on his knee, below the table's edge. 4 internal case numbers, written in careful block print. The ink was slightly smeared on the 3rd, the way it gets when someone writes fast and folds the paper before the ink has dried. He read the numbers twice and memorized them, then folded the paper and placed it in the front pocket of the backpack. Cassandra came back around, appearing to check the napkin holder on his table. "Are those yours?" Marcus asked, without looking up. She nodded. "The first one was 9 months ago?" She set the pitcher down and looked at the napkin holder as though counting the stack. "My schedule changed to 3 shifts that week. When I asked why, my supervisor wrote that I was having difficulty adapting to the service direction." Marcus looked at her face. She was not performing. She was reporting, the way people report things they have rehearsed for a long time, in the hope that someone will eventually ask. "Why did you stay?" Cassandra looked toward the annex, at the nurse beside the partition, at the technician in the reflective vest, at the businessman with the document case balanced on his knees. "Because if every person who knows something leaves, there is no one here to tell guests that they are not imagining it." The answer carried no performance of courage. It carried the quiet fatigue of someone who had kept a post, long past the point where keeping it was comfortable. Before Marcus could respond, Diana appeared at the far end of the aisle. Cassandra moved smoothly back to the main room, her expression neutral in the way of people who have learned to make neutrality look like nothing happened. Marcus set his phone face up on the table. He had been building documentation for 2 hours, the photographs of the tray, the timestamps, the notes on seating patterns, the distributor name he had read off the cardboard case, the screen he had seen over Trevor Norris's shoulder at the door, the orange code beside his name. The phrase Diana had typed and not meant for him to read, none of it next would close a case on its own, but each piece connected to something real. The photograph of the salmon case from the anonymous email had been troubling because a single image could be misread. What he had watched with his own eyes this morning was a pattern, and patterns required explanation in a way that isolated incidents did not. He turned in his chair just enough to hear the self-service station near the service corridor. Trevor Norris stood beside a newly hired employee, one finger resting on the complaint management screen. The employee had the careful posture of someone trying to demonstrate that they were catching on. "Never use the word unsafe unless a guest has been medically examined," Trevor said. "The word triggers a mandatory compliance review, and that creates paperwork for everyone. Do not write discrimination. Do not write spoiled food. Do not write uneven verification. Those terms flag the system." The employee frowned slightly. "What should I put?" Trevor tapped the category menu. Guest dissatisfied with presentation. Guest misunderstood service benefits. Emotional response to explanation. Uncooperative after clarification. Keep the language operational, not accusatory, even when the guest's words were accusatory. Because your job is to describe the service outcome, not repeat everything a guest said at a difficult moment. The new employee nodded slowly, with the expression of someone trying to believe they were learning something reasonable. Marcus filled his glass at the water station and paused beside the computer desk on the way back. The nurse's complaint was still open on the screen. Her original language was visible. Fruit smelled fermented, possible spoilage. Trevor had not seen Marcus stop there. He stood beside the employee and talked through 2 more complaint categories. Then he opened the nurse's record, clicked edit, and typed for less than a minute. When the screen refreshed, the record read, "Guest dissatisfied with menu selection. No product concern verified." The warning was gone. It had not been investigated. It had been translated. Marcus returned to his table. He thought about how many times that translation had happened in this room, how many people had described a real experience in plain language, and then received, in place of an investigation, a document that said their experience had been something smaller and less significant. Not a lie simple enough to identify and argue against. A reclassification. Smooth, official, sealed by the authority of whoever held the tablet. From the main room came the sound of an irritated voice. A white traveler stood beside the coffee station, speaking at a volume that required no effort to hear across the partition. He wanted to know why his drink had taken 10 minutes. He said 10 minutes twice, then said it was unacceptable. His palm struck the counter once, not hard enough to break anything, hard enough to be heard. An attendant appeared within seconds. She apologized, offered a fresh cup, and added complimentary lounge points to his profile. No manager approached. No behavior code was entered. No orange label appeared beside his name. His frustration, expressed loudly and physically, became a service recovery opportunity within 60 seconds. The nurse's quiet, seated concern had become a reason to monitor her. Marcus looked at the coffee station, then at the nurse's table, then at the screen, where her complaint had just been rewritten. 2 guests, 2 records, 2 entirely different versions of what had happened in the same room, and added a note. Not the details of what he had observed, which he had already entered. Something simpler, a question he wanted Raymond Okafor to ask when the review began. How many complaints originated in the annex this calendar year? And how many of them were closed under the category of presentation dissatisfaction? He already knew the answer would matter. He suspected he already knew what it would be. The lounge door opened again just before 9. Calvin Mercer entered first, moving at the careful pace of a man who had made his peace with not moving fast. He was tall, silver-haired, wearing a pressed sport coat over a blue collared shirt, and he leaned on a dark wooden cane with the economy of someone who had been leaning on it long enough that it had become an extension of the arm rather than an admission. The cane was old. The coat was not. He had dressed for travel the way men of First Generation dressed for travel, as though arriving somewhere still meant arriving. Irene Mercer walked beside him, close enough to steady without making the steadying visible. She carried both boarding passes in one hand and a small tote bag in the other. Her eyes moved across the room the way eyes move in an unfamiliar space, taking in the arrangement before committing to it. Their passes were scanned green at the podium. First class. Full access. Diana Harlow emerged from behind the main desk. Marcus watched her take in Calvin's cane, then the plain travel coat Irene had draped over her arm, then their faces. The sequence was the same one she had used on him that morning, and it produced the same conclusion. She turned to a nearby attendant and said, with the pleasant authority of someone announcing an obvious decision, "Annex. It will be more appropriate for them." The attendant did not question it. More appropriate was a phrase that meant nothing and everything at once. More appropriate for what? The annex offered narrower seating, a service cart route that ran directly through the aisle, and no view of the runway. The main room had empty tables near the windows, several of them visible from where Marcus sat. More appropriate in the language Diana had spent months building, meant, "I have made a judgment and I am not required to explain it." The attendant led Calvin and Irene toward the partition. The aisle narrowed there, the way aisles narrow, where a wall meets a fixture that was never meant to be adjacent to a thoroughfare. Calvin turned sideways, lifting the cane over the wheel of a service cart that had been left at the corner. His face tightened for half a second, not long enough to become a gesture anyone would need to respond to, only long enough for Irene to notice. She placed her hand just below his elbow and guided him through without speaking. They reached a table 2 rows from Marcus. Irene looked toward the main room. The window tables were still empty. She looked at the boarding passes in her hand and then back at the tables by the windows, running a small, quiet calculation that Marcus recognized because he had run it himself many times. How much energy is this worth? How much of this morning do I want to spend proving what the screen has already confirmed? She set the calculation aside. She helped Calvin lower himself into the chair and placed the cane within reach against the table leg. She sat across from him and adjusted her bag under her seat. An attendant brought a tray. Marcus saw it from across the aisle and recognized it before the plate was fully set down. The same lukewarm chicken sandwich in the same loose paper wrap, the same cloudy fruit cup, the same coffee with the surface film. He had photographed that tray an hour ago. He had noted that the yogurt container had no date label. The tray in front of Calvin Mercer came from the same batch, the same secondary stock room, the same chain of decisions that had decided some guests' health was worth less careful attention than others. Calvin reached into his jacket pocket and removed a small rectangular case. He set it on the table and opened it. Inside were 2 prescription bottles and a folded card from a physician. He looked at the card, then at the tray, and said to Irene in the tone of a man doing math, "I'm supposed to eat before these." He began to unwrap the sandwich. Marcus was standing before he made the decision to stand. He crossed the aisle without urgency, stopping at a distance that would not crowd them far enough to be ignored if they wanted to ignore him. "Sir," he said, "I apologize for interrupting. Please do not eat that until someone checks the temperature." Calvin looked up. His expression was measured, the expression of a man who had encountered enough unexpected things in 71 years to wait for more information before reacting. "My meal came from the same batch," Marcus said. It showed signs of improper storage. The sandwich had not been held at a safe temperature. The yogurt had no date label. I photographed it. He held out his phone with the photograph on screen. Calvin studied it without touching the phone. Then he looked at his own tray. Irene leaned forward before he could. She was close enough to the fruit cup to catch the smell. One breath, and her face changed entirely. The concentrated frown of someone registering something that has no business being on a table in a room that costs what this room costs. She pushed the entire tray away from Calvin with one firm motion. "That is not right," she said. Marcus turned toward the nearest attendant. He did not raise his voice. "Please bring a food thermometer and check the date labels on this batch before anything else is served from it." Diana Harlow appeared almost immediately, moving through the annex with the rapid certainty of someone whose job had just exceeded its acceptable boundaries. She did not look at the tray. She did not look at Irene or at the food cup. Irene had pushed aside. Her eyes went to Marcus and stayed there, as though the danger in the room were standing upright in a grey jacket with a backpack. "Mr. Webb," she said, "return to your seat. You need to stop approaching other guests." "He didn't bother us," Irene said. Diana barely glanced at her. "We have received concerns about this guest's behavior throughout the morning." Marcus turned fully toward her. His voice was level. "Concerns from whom? I'm not required to identify other guests by name." "Then identify the behavior." Diana's jaw moved. "You have approached people without invitation. You have questioned staff and refused to accept direction. Which of those things created a safety risk?" She pressed the tablet against her chest. Your pattern of conduct is becoming disruptive." She had answered without answering, which was itself an answer of a kind. She had supplied a label. She had not supplied a fact. Marcus had seen that technique applied to complaint records all morning, and now he was standing inside it. Calvin spoke from his chair without moving. "The food still hasn't been checked." Cassandra Reed arrived from the direction of the main podium. She moved with her shoulders set in a way that Marcus recognized as the posture of someone who has decided to say something they cannot unsay, and has accepted that. "We need to stop serving from that batch," she said, "until someone verifies the temperature." Diana turned to her. "Are you taking a guest's side against your own manager?" Cassandra held the manager's gaze for a moment that was longer than it appeared. Fear moved across her face. Then it settled into something that did not look like courage exactly, but looked like what courage looks like when it is not performed for anyone. "I'm taking the side of what is safe," she said. The annex went quiet in the way spaces go quiet when everyone in them understands that something important has just been said out loud. Diana lifted her radio. "Call airport security." Diana's voice was calm, aimed at the radio. "Guest in the annex is interfering with staff and encouraging subordinates to disregard direct management instruction." Cassandra did not withdraw what she had said. 2 airport security officers entered the lounge less than 3 minutes later, moving with the measured pace of people trained to enter rooms without escalating them. They were both young, and they looked at the annex the way people look at spaces they have not been in before, taking in the partition, the worn carpet, the service corridor running through the seating area, before looking at the people inside. Diana stepped forward before either officer had asked a question. She pointed toward Marcus. "That is the guest causing the disturbance." Her version was smooth, organized, and arrived fully formed. She said that Marcus had refused to follow staff direction, had approached other members of the lounge without their invitation, and had created a tense environment that was affecting the comfort of other guests. She did not mention that his ticket had scanned green. She did not mention the orange code she had added manually to his profile. She did not mention the food tray that had not been inspected, the fruit cup with the fermented smell, or the fact that Cassandra had asked to stop serving from the batch before Diana picked up the radio. One of the officers turned toward Marcus. He had steady eyes and a careful posture, the posture of someone who understood that his presence in a room was itself a form of action, and who tried not to waste it. "Sir, can you tell me what happened?" Marcus kept his hands open at his sides. "Am I accused of threatening anyone?" The officer glanced at Diana. "No one has said that. Did anyone claim I touched them? No. Did anyone in this room hear me raise my voice?" The officer looked around. The nurse near the partition was watching. The technician in the reflective had turned in his chair. The businessman with the document case had straightened up and set the case on the table. Calvin Mercer sat with his hands folded, his gaze moving between the officers and the untouched tray. Irene sat beside him with the stillness of someone who had decided to observe rather than act, and who was recording everything. The officer said, "Not that I'm aware of." Marcus gestured toward Calvin's table then. "What policy prevents a guest from warning another guest about food that shows signs of unsafe storage?" Diana cut in before the officer could respond. "This is not a courtroom." "No," Marcus said. "It is a lounge that serves food to the public. That requires clearer answers, not fewer." Irene leaned forward from her chair. "He never threatened us. He stopped my husband from eating something that smelled spoiled." Calvin nodded. "I am grateful he did." The second officer was looking at the tray. The food had not been touched since Irene pushed it aside. "Has anyone checked the temperature?" he asked, directing the question at no one in particular. Diana's mouth opened. It did not produce an answer. Cassandra stood near the main podium with both hands clasped in front of her. Mr. Webb's access was valid from the moment of entry. The monitoring code on his profile was added manually after his boarding pass scanned green. Diana turned on her sharply. "Cassandra, you are violating internal procedure by disclosing system information to a guest." Cassandra held her posture. She did not argue the procedure, she stated the fact. The monitoring code was added manually after the scan. The first officer looked from Cassandra to Diana to the tray. He had the expression of someone assembling a picture and not yet liking what it showed. "Ma'am," he said to Diana, "is there a food safety concern here that hasn't been addressed?" Diana's composure held, but something beneath it shifted. The certainty that had organized her morning did not disappear, but it recalibrated, like a structure adjusting to a weight it had not accounted for. Marcus reached into his jacket and took out his phone. He found the number he needed and pressed call. Raymond Okafor answered on the first ring. "Raymond?" "Marcus." "Adrian." The Spartner Lounge. Marcus kept his eyes on the service corridor. "Lock all guest record editing privileges at the Chicago location. Preserve 120 days of camera footage. Suspend all transaction connected to this facility's food vendors until further notice." Diana stared at him. Her mouth had closed. "No inventory is to leave service door 3. Stop food service immediately. Arrange access for affected guests at the Partner Lounge and issue full refunds on today's fees. All of them." He ended the call. Trevor Norris had been standing near the kitchen entrance since the officer arrived. At the words "Service Door 3, something moved across his face, a brief calculation that resolved itself into action. He took 2 steps toward the corridor. One of the security officers moved into his path without touching him. "Sir, that area is being preserved for review. Please remain in this section." Trevor stopped. He looked at the officer, then at Marcus. His face went through something that was not quite recognition and not quite surprise, but occupied the space between them where understanding arrives too late. Diana turned to Marcus with a voice that had lost some of its organization. "Who do you think you are, giving orders in my facility?" Marcus ended the call and set the phone in his jacket pocket. He did not answer her. The question had answered itself. But it had taken the entire morning to get there, and he had needed every part of it. He had needed to stand in the priority lane, while she called it professional judgment. He had needed to sit in the annex and watch which guests were directed past the partition and which ones were invited to choose. He had needed to see the orange code beside his name, the tray with no date label, the cases moving through door 3, the complaint rewritten before anyone picked up a thermometer. He had needed to watch Cassandra's face when she decided to stay at her post, despite everything that staying had cost her. He could have ended any of this at the entrance. He had not come to Charlotte to end it early. He had come to learn what happened to people who could not call the chairman when the rules changed in front of them. Now he knew. 15 minutes later, Raymond Okafor walked through the lounge entrance. Beside him came Dr. Selina Park and 2 compliance specialists carrying secured evidence cases. Raymond scanned the room and took in the annex in one pass, the officers, the untouched tray, Trevor near the corridor wall, Diana beside the podium, Marcus standing between them. Raymond spoke at a volume that reached every corner. "Mr. Webb, editing access has been locked as requested. All Chicago camera files are under preservation. Senior leadership has been notified and is waiting for your report." The lounge went silent. Diana looked from Raymond to Marcus. Then she looked at the Pinnacle Crown emblem mounted on the wall behind her, the brushed metal letters she had stood beneath every morning for 4 years, and something in her face shifted in a way that had no category in the systems she had spent 4 years building. Trevor's breathing changed. Cassandra's eyes widened, though nothing in her face suggested triumph. She looked at Marcus the way a person looks when they are trying to reconcile 2 versions of the same person and have just realized they were both accurate. Diana's voice arrived smaller than anything she had said all morning. "I didn't know who you were." Mark met her eyes. "My ticket told you everything you needed to know to do your job correctly," he said. Marcus made clear in the first minutes after Raymond's arrival that no one was to be detained or searched. His instructions were not punitive. They were procedural. The stockroom was to remain untouched until the compliance team secured it. The management computers and service files were not to be accessed or altered. Door 3 was to remain closed until camera documentation and inventory records had been cross-checked. He asked Cassandra Reed to help move the lounge guests calmly to the partner lounge in the adjacent concourse, where Pinnacle Crown would cover access, sealed meals, and any transportation assistance needed. He asked Raymond to speak with the airport security officers and explain the scope of the investigation so they understood what they were holding. Then he crossed to Calvin and Irene Mercer's table. "How are you feeling?" he asked Calvin. Calvin studied him for a moment, the way a man who has spent a long life reading people studies someone when the ground has just shifted under both of them. Steady, hungry but steady. Marcus asked Raymond to contact Airport Medical Services. He found a sealed food package from an approved vending kiosk in the terminal and checked the label carefully before handing it to Calvin. It was not what the lounge should have offered him. It was what was available and safe. Calvin unwrapped it slowly, ate half of it, and opened his medication case. He took the first of the 2 tablets with water and set the second back in its slot. Irene had not moved from her chair. She watched the compliance team set up near the service corridor, watched Dr. Selena Park open an evidence case thermometer, watched Diana Harlow standing beside the main podium without her tablet, which Raymond had already secured. "You own this, Irene?" asked Marcus. He sat in the chair across the aisle. "I founded it. I still hold authority over the operation." She looked around the room, the partition, the narrow aisle, the service cart route that forced a man with a knee injury to turn sideways just to reach a seat. "We used this lounge twice before," she said. "The last time was different." Marcus looked at the floor near the partition, at the carpet worn thin where service carts had turned. He did not know when the annex had become what it was this morning, whether it had arrived gradually, or whether there had been a specific moment when someone decided that certain guests would receive certain things, and that the lounge's systems could be used to make the arrangement invisible. What he knew was that the arrangement had existed long enough to require 4 separate internal complaints, a reduction in one employee's working hours, and the manual removal of date labels from food product. "The investigation will be thorough," he said. "What was done here will be documented clearly, and what gets changed will be changed. Because of the documentation, not because of who I am." Irene looked at him with the expression of someone evaluating a promise against a long record of experience. Then she nodded, once with the cautious precision of someone who has learned to reserve full belief for the evidence that accumulates later. At the service corridor, Dr. Park inserted the thermometer into the chicken sandwich from Calvin's tray. She waited for the reading to stabilize. When she held the display toward Raymond, he looked at it and said nothing for a moment. The number sat outside the safe range by enough to require documentation, not interpretation. Diana had been watching from the podium, she said. "This is being made to look worse than it was. Everything we did was intended to maintain the premium experience." Marcus turned toward her without moving from where he stood. "Why did the white guests who entered after me receive access without additional verification?" Diana folded her arms. "Each interaction is managed differently. Why were black guests with valid access repeatedly placed in the annex, while open tables remained in the main room? We make seating assignments based on operational considerations and available resources. Why was a food safety complaint rewritten as dissatisfaction with presentation?" Diana's eyes moved toward Raymond, searching for a more neutral audience. "Staff have to interpret what guests mean. People describe things in emotional terms. Marcus unlocked the screenshot of his profile that Raymond had preserved and held the tablet so Diana could see it. Presentation mismatch, he said. Confirm behavior before extended service. That note was in the system before I did anything. That is not behavior. That is how you saw me before I had taken a single action inside this room. Diana's composure did not collapse. It thinned the way a surface thins when the pressure behind it becomes more than it was designed to hold. This was a misunderstanding, she said. Marcus set the tablet down. My ticket was clear. The food is clear. The camera footage will be clear. Trevor Norris stepped forward from where he had been standing. He had the expression of someone who had been calculating options for the past 20 minutes and had arrived at the one that seemed least dangerous. The cases that went through door 3 were excess inventory, he said. We transferred them to avoid waste. There's a local event company we work with on overflow product. Raymond looked up from his evidence log. The system shows those cases were transferred to the service floor, not to an external recipient. Trevor's confidence developed a hairline fracture. Someone may have entered the wrong destination code. Raymond said, "Is there a transfer order?" There should be one. Raymond scrolled through the records on his laptop. There isn't. Trevor said it may not have uploaded correctly. Raymond said, "Tell me again where the inventory went." Trevor said it again, and the second version was not quite the same as the first. Marcus said to Raymond quietly, "Record both explanations. Compare them to the camera footage and to the vendor payment records." Trevor started to say something. He thought better of it. Diana looked around the room and seemed, for the first time that morning, to understand that no one in it was waiting for her permission. She had been the authority here for 4 years. She had built the systems, supervised the language, approved the classifications, and signed the performance reports that described this lounge as a model of the premium experience. She had believed, perhaps sincerely, that the management of perception was the same thing as the management of reality. "Are you terminating us here?" she asked. Marcus studied her. "You and Mr. Norris are suspended from company systems and operational duties pending full investigation. You will receive written notification of the specific allegations, access to all evidence used in the review, and the opportunity to respond with representation present." Diana blinked. "After everything you believe I've done?" "Fair process," Marcus said, "is not reserved for people I agree with." Near the podium, Cassandra Reed stood very still. She had just finished helping the last of the annex guests toward the partner lounge. She turned toward Marcus with an expression that was not relief exactly, but something adjacent to it, the expression of someone who has been holding a breath for 9 months and has just been told they can stop. "Mr. Webb," she said, "I gave you internal case numbers." Diana was right about that part. Raymond looked at Marcus. "Preserve MIDS, read schedule, pay and personnel file," Marcus said. "No changes of any kind without compliance approval." Cassandra opened her mouth, perhaps expecting something more. Marcus did not offer it. "You will be interviewed like everyone else," he said. "What you reported will be evaluated on its own evidence." Something left her shoulders. Not everything, but enough. The investigation took 5 days. Raymond Okafor directed it from the partner lounge concourse, while his team worked through the secured files at Pinnacle Crown Chicago. The evidence cases that Dr. Selena Park had carried in that morning were joined by 2 additional sets by the end of the first afternoon. Hotel staff from the adjacent terminal brought workstations. A regional compliance attorney joined by video on the second morning. Marcus was present for the opening phase and returned to Washington that evening. He read Raymond's summary reports each night from his office, the same desk where, 3 days before the trip, he had read 2 documents side by side and decided that the gap between them required him to see things for himself. He had been right to come. The camera footage told the story in patient, repetitive frames. Service Door 3 appeared in 23 separate recordings across the 120 days Raymond had preserved. In 17 of those recordings, Trevor Norris pushed a cart through the door during low traffic windows in the early morning or late afternoon, when fewer employees and guests were present in the annex. The carts carried sealed cases from Pinnacle Crown's approved premium vendors. On the other side of the door, in the corridor footage that the lounge cameras captured at an angle, a man in an events company jacket received the cases and transferred them to a second cart. The company's name appeared in regional event listings. It had no contract with Pinnacle Crown. It had no authorization to receive Pinnacle Crown inventory. The vendor payment records told the second part of the story. Trevor had avoided large electronic transfers of the kind that appear on reconciliation reports and attract a second set of eyes. Instead, he used small payments from multiple accounts, prepaid debit cards, gift cards from hotel loyalty programs, and false consulting invoices submitted under a dormant vendor code. One invoice described services rendered for regional logistics optimization. The vendor code had not been active for 3 years. Raymond's team traced the individual amounts, which ranged from $200 to $1,100 each, across 14 months of records. Together, they totaled approximately $260,000. No single payment had looked like theft. Together, they were nothing else. The inventory records closed the loop. When Raymond compared the purchasing invoices against the product actually present on the service floor and in the secondary stockroom, the discrepancy was visible immediately. Pinnacle Crown had paid for premium smoked salmon, imported cheese, and bakery items from approved suppliers. The secondary stockroom held replacement products from a distributor whose name had never appeared in a Pinnacle Crown contract. The quality differential between the two was significant. The cost differential was significant. The difference had been absorbed by the annex, whose guests had eaten substitutes, while the main buffet retained enough premium product to pass any inspection that announced itself in advance. Trevor had built his scheme on a foundation that Diana Harlow had constructed without knowing she was building it for him. The classification system, the orange codes, the seating practices, the complaint rewriting protocol had all been Diana's work. She had designed them around a set of assumptions she had never examined carefully enough to name. Trevor had recognized those assumptions and realized that complaints from the annex would be processed through Diana's systems in a way that made them manageable, dismissible, and ultimately invisible. He had not created the bias. He had used it. Raymond found the complaint records on the third day. More than 160 guest reports had been deleted, closed under incorrect categories, or rewritten until the original concern had been replaced by something that required no response. A complaint about repeated identification requests became sensitivity to routine verification. Sour food became dissatisfaction with presentation. A calm inquiry about seating options became confrontational behavior. In 17 of the rewritten records, camera footage of the same interaction was available and matched the original complaint, not the revision. Black travelers with the same ticket class and membership tier as white travelers had been flagged for additional verification at a rate that the compliance attorney described, in her written summary, as statistically significant and not attributable to random variation. They had been directed to the annex at a higher rate. They had received restricted menu access at a higher rate. White guests who complained loudly had typically received service recovery responses, with no behavior note added. Black guests who asked quiet questions had typically received behavior notes and no service response. The data was not ambiguous. Diana Harlow had not received money from Trevor's operation. Raymond found no evidence that she knew the specific details of the inventory transfers. What the investigation found was that she had approved the guest classification practices, permitted the complaint editing procedures, ignored food safety warnings, reduced Cassandra Reed's work hours after each of Cassandra's 4 internal reports, and submitted false performance summaries to the regional office that described the Charlotte location as a model of consistent, equitable service. Her polished documentation had not concealed a problem, it had protected one. On the 4th day, Raymond met with the regional manager who had received Cassandra's first complaint 9 months earlier. The manager had read the report and filed it without opening a formal review. His explanation was that the complaint had seemed minor and that the manager of the Charlotte location had a strong record. Raymond documented the explanation and forwarded it to senior leadership. On the 5th day, Raymond presented the findings to Marcus in a call that lasted less than an hour. There was nothing in the summary that surprised Marcus, each piece connected to something he had observed in the room that Monday morning. The orange code, the partition, the tray, the cases moving through door 3 while the nurse's complaint was being rewritten on the other side of the annex. He had suspected most of it before he came. He had needed to see it to know that what he suspected was real, and that the people who had lived inside it deserved something more than suspicion. He had needed to see Cassandra's face when she decided to stay at her post. He had needed to hear Irene Mercer say he never threatened us with the flat certainty of someone who was finished adjusting her words for an audience that had not earned the adjustment. He had needed to watch Calvin Mercer lift the cane over a service cart wheel in a room designed by a man who had believed, when he chose those dimensions, that every guest would move through the space with equal ease. The investigation was not finished. Formal response periods were required before disciplinary conclusions could be documented. Attorneys on both sides would need to review the evidence, but Marcus had what he had come for. He had watched what happened to people who could not call the chairman when the rules shifted in front of them, and he had decided, on the drive back to the airport after the compliance team arrived, that the investigation could not end with one bad manager and one dishonest logistics supervisor and one embarrassing morning. It had to end with a different room. The formal response period lasted 3 weeks. Trevor Norris received written notification of the allegations, a full copy of the evidence file, and the opportunity to respond with legal representation. His attorney submitted a 40-page response that argued each inventory transfer had been authorized through verbal agreements with former staff members, that the payment records were incomplete and subject to accounting error, and that the camera footage showed routine logistics operations that had been mischaracterized by an investigation with a predetermined conclusion. Raymond's team compared the response against the camera timestamps, the vendor payment records, and the interview notes from the warehouse employee who had received deliveries on the other side of door 3. The warehouse employee had not been represented by an attorney. He had accepted a voluntary interview and described the arrangement in specific detail, including the payment structure, the frequency of deliveries, and a phone number Trevor had given him to arrange timing. Trevor's response did not survive contact with that level of documentation. His employment with Pinnacle Crown was terminated. The financial records were referred to the appropriate federal authority for review of potential wire fraud and commercial theft. Marcus made no public statement about the referral. The referral itself was the statement. Diana Harlow's formal response was different in tone. She did not dispute the operational facts. She argued that the guest classification system had been implemented in good faith as a risk management tool, that the complaint editing procedures had been designed to prevent emotional language from distorting service records, and that the seating assignments in the annex had been based on operational considerations that were not race-conscious. The compliance attorney reviewed the camera footage against the seating records. She reviewed the complaint edits against the original statements. She reviewed Diana's performance summaries against the documentation Raymond's team had assembled. She drafted a conclusion that described a pattern of discriminatory treatment, retaliatory action against a reporting employee, material misrepresentation to regional leadership, and failure to respond to documented food safety concerns. Diana Harlow was dismissed. The regional manager, who had received Cassandra's first report 9 months earlier and had not opened a review, was removed from supervisory responsibility and placed in a non-managerial role pending a separate review of his oversight practices. Marcus refused to treat all employees as equally responsible for what had happened. Staff members who had altered complaint records, hidden inventory, or actively participated in the scheme faced discipline based on the evidence specific to each person. Employees who had followed instructions without knowingly participating in fraud were interviewed separately, retrained, and placed under 6-month behavioral review. Some of them admitted during their interviews that they had understood something was wrong and had been afraid to say so. Marcus did not excuse that fear. He also did not confuse it with the decision Trevor Norris had made when he built a theft scheme on top of it. But Cassandra Reed was not promoted. She was interviewed under the same process as everyone else, and her account was evaluated against the 4 internal reports she had filed over 9 months, the documentation Raymond had preserved, and the camera footage from the days following each report. Her account held up at every point. Her 5-shift schedule was restored. Pinnacle Crown repaid the wages she had lost during the 9 months she had worked reduced hours. The retaliatory warning in her personnel file was removed. She was invited to help design the new complaint and reporting structure, the one that would allow employees to escalate concerns outside the local chain of command, without the report passing through the manager's office first. Marcus met with her privately after the review had concluded. "What matters," he said, "is not that you helped me. You reported what was happening when you believed I was another passenger with no particular reason to listen to you." Cassandra looked down for a moment. When she looked up, relief moved across her face, alongside something more complicated, the look of someone who has been believed after a long time of not being believed, and is not yet entirely sure what to do with it. She was assigned as Service Integrity Coordinator under a new director with 15 years of compliance experience. She began a 12-month leadership development program the following Monday. It was not a promotion designed to generate a good story for a press release. It was a role she had earned by doing a specific thing well under specific pressure. Raymond met Marcus outside the closed lounge a week before the planned reopening. The temporary barriers covered the entrance. Behind them, contractors had been working for 5 weeks. The Pinnacle Crown letters were still visible above the barriers, brushed metal undisturbed. "We could rename the location," Raymond said. "Give it distance from what happened here." Marcus looked at the letters. He remembered how they had looked that Monday morning, through the eyes of a man who had just been told his ticket required extra attention. They had looked like a question being withheld. He remembered what he had wanted them to be when he chose them, more than 20 years ago, in a rented office with 3 employees and a lease on a single room at an airport in Baltimore. He had wanted them to mean that the person walking beneath them had been considered before they arrived. Changing the name would mean never having to make that true here. Keeping it meant they had to. "Keep the name," he told Raymond. Through the gaps in the barriers, he could see the work that had been done. The partition that had divided the annex from the main room was gone. The floor where it had stood had been relaid. New carpet ran from the entrance to the back wall in a single uninterrupted field. The aisle had been widened by 18 inches, and the service cart route had been moved to the perimeter, where it did not pass through seating. The rear windows had been uncovered. Light reached every table. The outlets along the back wall had been repaired. New cameras covered the service corridor in overlapping fields, with no angle that was not recorded. The secondary stockroom had been brought under the same inventory scanning protocol as the main receiving area. Every case checked at intake, again at the service floor, and once more before leaving the building. Any discrepancy between the three scans generated an automatic alert to the compliance team, not the local manager. The complaint system had been redesigned. Every report now required a second reviewer before it could be closed. The category menu no longer contained language like dissatisfied with presentation when the guest's original words described a product concern. An employee who wanted to rewrite a complaint had to submit a written explanation of the change, which was stored in a separate log accessible to the regional compliance office. The old guest classification codes were gone entirely. The training room near the staff entrance had been repainted. Irene Mercer's words had been printed in plain letters near the door, where every employee would see them at the beginning of each shift. Respect is not an upgrade benefit. Not in the public lounge. Not framed under a company logo in the corridor where guests could photograph it and share it as evidence of institutional goodness. Just there, by the staff entrance. For the people who were going to have to make it true every morning. Reopening morning arrived on a Thursday 7 weeks after Diana Harlow had pointed toward Marcus Webb and told the security officers that he was the problem. The Pinnacle Crown Lounge at Chicago O'Hare opened its doors at 6 in the morning, as it always had. The new manager, a woman named Elaine Dorado, who had spent 12 years running a regional hospitality operation in Atlanta, had been on site since 4. She walked the floor twice before the first guests arrived, checking each table, testing each outlet, confirming that the complaint system was logging properly, and that the food temperature records from intake the night before matched the shelving log in the kitchen. She did not know Marcus was coming. No one at the lounge had been told. He arrived at 7:43. Same grey t-shirt, same canvas jacket, same dark jeans. The leather shoes worn soft at the toe. The backpack over one shoulder, faded at the seams, repaired twice at the zipper. He had taken it out of the cabinet that morning and held it for a moment before putting it on, thinking about his father's voice. Don't let people make you dress expensive just to earn decent treatment. And about how the backpack had meant something different when he carried it at 23 because he had nothing else, and what it meant now that he carried it by choice. He joined the priority lane and waited. Cassandra Reed was behind the podium. She had been placed there on Elaine Dorado's recommendation and with the compliance officer's approval. It was her first shift as service integrity coordinator, and she had arrived 20 minutes early. Her uniform was the same one she had worn every day for 2 years. The name badge had a second line printed in smaller text beneath her name, Service Integrity Coordinator. She looked up when Marcus reached the podium. For a moment, the two of them held the weight of the morning 6 weeks earlier, when she had stood at the same desk and watched an orange code appear beside a name she had not yet known to recognize, and had decided what she was going to do about it, despite not knowing whether doing it would matter. She held out her hand for his phone. He placed it in her palm. She scanned the boarding pass. The scanner chimed once. The screen turned green. First-class access confirmed. Cassandra looked at the screen and then at Marcus. Welcome to Pinnacle Crown, Mr. Webb. Marcus looked at the screen. That's all? She allowed herself a small smile. Not the full professional one, the real one, controlled but visible. Valid ticket, she said. He stepped through. The room he entered was not entirely different from the room he had left 7 weeks before. The windows were in the same places. The buffet was in the same corner. The service corridor was behind the same door marked 3. If a person had been inside the old lounge and the new one, they might not have immediately identified a single dramatic change. but the partition was gone. Light reached the back of the room the way light reaches the back of a room designed to have no hidden section. The carpet ran uninterrupted. The rear tables faced the runway. A woman in a maintenance uniform sat near the far window, eating from the same breakfast menu as two men in business suits who had arrived before her. No attendant had suggested she try the annex. The idea of an annex no longer existed in the physical space or in the system that ran the room. A black nurse sat beside a functioning outlet near the east wall, laptop open, a full coffee on the table beside a plate from the buffet. Nobody had given her a paper menu. Nobody had noted her arrival time or logged her question about the made-to-order station. A white couple in athletic wear came through the door 30 seconds after Marcus and received the same scan, the same greeting, and the same invitation to choose any open table. They chose one near the buffet. The woman asked about the made-to-order eggs. An attendant described the options with the same attention she had given the previous guest. No one received suspicion. No one received royalty. The room operated at the same register for everyone in it, which was the only version of consistent that Marcus had ever been willing to call consistent. He walked to the table where he had sat on that Monday morning, the chair near service door 3. He set the backpack beside it and lowered himself into the seat. The door was still there. He had not ordered it removed. Removing it would have been its own form of pretending, the kind that replaces a difficult truth with an easier surface. The door was a supply corridor, and the supply corridor was necessary. What had changed was everything around it. The camera mounted above it now covered the loading area at an angle that overlapped with the camera in the main corridor. The inventory log beside the door required 3-point scanning before product could leave the building. The morning scan records were already in the compliance system, visible to Raymond Okafor's office in real time. There was no hidden corner left in this room. Elaine Dorado appeared at the edge of Marcus's peripheral vision, but did not approach immediately. She watched the floor the way managers watch floors when they believe the watching matters, not to catch errors, but to understand what the room was doing and whether it was doing what it was supposed to do. After a few minutes, she came to Marcus's table. He stood. She introduced herself and said she had read the compliance summary. She said that she understood what the investigation had found and that she also understood what it had not found, which was any single moment when everything had broken at once. What it had found was a long accumulation of small decisions that had each seemed manageable on their own. She said that the hardest thing about managing a room like this was not the dramatic failures. It was the routine ones, the ones that didn't feel like failures when they happened. Marcus listened. Then he asked whether she had read Irene Mercer's line near the staff entrance. Elaine said she had read it the first morning she arrived, and had come back to read it again before the floor opened that day. He said, "Good, keep coming back to it." Before leaving, he walked to the exit and stood beneath the Pinnacle Crown letters one more time. Outside, in the terminal, the morning crowd was building toward the 9 o'clock wave of departures. People in suits, people in gym shoes, people with children, people with only a carry-on, and a connecting flight they were not sure they would make. Some of them were Pinnacle Crown members. Some of them were about to become members. Most of them would arrive at the lounge entrance, not knowing whether the morning would treat their ticket as sufficient. He thought about each of those people. The ones who had no one to call, the ones who would receive whatever the room offered them, good or bad, and go on to their gate, and catch their flight, and carry the experience of the morning with them the way travelers carry things. Invisible in the weight of how the day had begun. A brand proved its values once. Then it proved them again. Then it proved them on a morning when the person at the door believed that no one important was watching. Marcus adjusted the backpack strap and walked into the terminal. If this story stayed with you, subscribe and hit the like button. We want to hear from you. Which moment hit hardest?